Dan Perry is an Israeli affairs analyst and also the former regional editor of the Associated Press in the Middle East, joining us live now from Tel Aviv. Dan, thanks very much for joining us. So Witkoff saying perhaps it needs to stop some of these Israeli aids and perhaps resolve this conflict through dialogue. It's a bit wishy-washy saying perhaps. Where does the US stand when it comes to Israel carrying on with this war? Does it have much power at the moment? Because Netanyahu seems to be going ahead with what he wants to do anyway.
Well, of course the U.S. has power. Israel can't continue the war for any length of time without American support. American munitions and American diplomatic cover at the UN and elsewhere. But the U.S. administration seems to be aligned with Netanyahu. Basically, there was big shock in the past week that Israel basically walked away from the agreement that it signed under pressure from Trump, but had done so with support from Trump. So it's inescapable that Israel violated the agreement. But of course, honoring agreements is so very 20th century. Once we simply understand that we're back to the original paradigm, where we were a year and a half ago, where Israel says it can no longer stand this bellicose militia armed to the teeth on its border, and it must go. And Hamas says, well, we won't return the hostages unless you end the war and abandon that demand. It seems to be complete and total loggerheads. And the way it's probably going to proceed, unless something else happens, is a long-term Israeli occupation and military administration of the Gaza Strip with U.S. support. I look at all the comments and I see what the Israelis are doing, and I note that the Israelis have not yet agreed to seriously discuss any day after Hamas plan in Gaza, and that's where it appears to be headed.
What do you mean when you say a military administration of Gaza? What would that look like, do you think?
I think it would look like the status quo ante the Oslo Accords, basically, where Israel runs civilian life and has complete security control over Gaza, with the added wrinkle that they would probably have an armed insurgency with the remnants of Hamas for a long, long time. And this is not a good outcome for anyone, including not for Israel, nor is it popular in Israel. And the reason that might happen is because Israel itself has been blocking the establishment of an alternative clause, because the current government can't tolerate the idea of Palestinian autonomy run by the PA. So if we want something different, then I think what is required is a pincer movement of pressure by the world, and the Arab world in particular, on Hamas to indeed lay down their arms and disarm, and on Israel to agree to deal with the Palestinian Authority or some updated version thereof in order to find a way out of this disastrous year and a half of death and destruction.
And Dan, I just want to tell you about some news that we've had come in now, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered dozens of strikes on Lebanon. Obviously, you've been across what happened earlier today with these rockets being fired from southern Lebanon. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think this could mean going back to pre-ceasefire between the neighboring countries?
I think that Israel will hesitate before really resuming the war in Lebanon for many reasons, not least of which is that what happened until now is viewed as a success, maybe Israel's main success, if one can even use such terms, during this past year and a half of war. They're trying to pressure Lebanon into executing fully what they agreed to do, which is to control the south of their country and prevent attacks on Israel. Now, what happened today is fairly minor. It caused no major damage, but there were 3 projectiles across the border towards Metula. And in Israel, there's great anger at this. It's a matter of principle. They simply refuse to accept anymore the notion that militias across the border with some sort of version of deniability by the government that should be in charge across that border can strike at it. Now, I noticed that Hezbollah didn't claim responsibility. That's good, because it suggests that they know that that would open up floodgates to the resumption of conflict. And I also noticed that Prime Minister Salam of Lebanon is taking this very, very seriously. So the degree to which Israel strikes is something we'll have to see in coming hours. But I suspect it'll be measured because they want some version of persuasive reassurance from Lebanon that the deal is still on and that the Lebanese army is able to control the territory of southern Lebanon.
Okay, thanks very much for your time, Dan Perry there from Tel Aviv. Dan Perry is an Israeli affairs analyst and the former regional editor of the Associated Press in the Middle East. He joins us live now from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, for your time. Now, in this statement, he says that there's a need for Hamas to disarm, but perhaps remain in Gaza for a short period. That seems like a little bit of a U-turn from them saying that Hamas shouldn't exist, and certainly for Israel continuing with this war, which is to, in the words of the Israelis, eliminate Hamas.
Well, I mean, when I say eliminate Hamas, they basically mean eliminate them as a governing and fighting force in Gaza and anywhere in Palestine. So I wouldn't overparse the words of Witkoff. I mean, he represents the political forces in the U.S., and they say what they say. I think they're going for a win here. It's clear that the end game of the original ceasefire deal that the Trump administration itself pressured Israel to sign has been jettisoned, and they're back to the original demands that Hamas give up power in Gaza and disarm. Now, it is very interesting that just in the past 24 hours, Fatah, the political organization that runs the PA, basically calls on Hamas to step down, and Hamas itself appears to be saying that they have no interest in continuing to govern Gaza. So I think it will come down to something very basic and something that is analogous to what we're hearing the conversation around in Lebanon, which is the disarming of a militia that has grown accustomed in recent decades to operating in the shadows and effectively controlling the government.
And all of this is happening as there have been changes in the Israeli government. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, has returned back to the government. And then you also have a change of the chief of staff for the military. How is that likely to affect the possibility of even being able to look at what the Americans are calling the bridge proposal? And this was also brought up by Hamas to Al Jazeera a couple of days ago, saying that they're working on a bridge proposal. What's your understanding of that?
My understanding is that if Hamas in the end accepts the Witkoff bridge proposal, which means that they start returning hostages again while no longer demanding implementation of the deal, which would implicitly leave them in power, then I think the government basically survives. Netanyahu has shored up his coalition for sure, but keep in mind that most of his maneuverings are not popular at all in Israel. And by next year, there has to be a new election. And when 70 to 80% of the public oppose the return to the war, oppose his refusal to have an inquiry commission, oppose his acquiescence in incredible ways to the ultra-Orthodox communities in Israel, this will start to be an issue for Netanyahu. But it does look like he'll be able to survive the next couple of months and possibly even the entirety of the year.
And I just want to turn the attention to what's happening, obviously, in Lebanon now. There's been this cross-border fire with rockets being fired from Lebanon first and then Israel responding. Are you concerned at all that there perhaps could be an end to the ceasefire and we see what we saw a few months ago with rockets going over and Israel bombing the capital, Beirut?
Well, I think everyone has to be concerned, maybe first and foremost the Lebanese, as we heard from your previous guest up in Beirut. No decent, normal person wants that war to resume, and I take some reassurance from what I'm observing is close to a consensus in non-Hezbollah Lebanon that Hezbollah does need to disarm, and there needs to be one force of arms, a monopoly over force of arms, by the Lebanese government. Now, it's clear that they have been less than fully successful in controlling the south, but the music somehow is more reassuring than what we might have heard a year or two ago when there was complete acceptance of the fact that Hezbollah does what it wishes and can go around attacking neighboring countries. I think all people of good faith in this region have to hope for the success of the Lebanese government in imposing its control over Lebanon, and also, frankly, to hope for a version of the same in Palestine. And to go back to your question about Netanyahu, if indeed Hamas is compelled to stand aside and disarm, then what will need to happen then is pressure on Netanyahu's government, whether or not that embroils him and coalition troubles to start accepting a reasonable day after plan, which would involve the Palestinian Authority.
OK, thank you very much for your time. Dan Perry in Tel Aviv.